Exiled at 12 for lying about the ice fog, she built a steam hut they all needed. They told her she would freeze. Gustav Thorsen did not shout it. He did not curse or mock her. He simply sat tall on his horse in the fading light of August and said it like a man stating the price of cattle. "You'll freeze," he said. "And those children will freeze with you. That's arithmetic." Elsa Morenius stood barefoot in the dust outside her father's sod cabin and did not blink. She was 12 years old. In her pocket were 3 silver dollars worn thin from her father's hands. Behind her stood her brother Anders, 9 years old and trying not to cry, and her sister Marta, 6, silent since the funeral. The Morenius claim lay 11 miles southeast of Gardner, Montana territory, on a stretch of land that looked beautiful from far away and cruel up close. The Yellowstone River cut through the valley like a silver knife. The mountains stood tall and proud. But winter did not care about beauty. Her father had believed this land would give them a future. He had filed on the quarter section in the spring of 1886, just like hundreds of other immigrants chasing the promise of the American West. He had cattle then, hope then, a strong back and a laugh that filled the cabin. Then came the winter they would later call the Great Die-Up. Snow fell fast and hard. The cold sank to 40 below. Cattle froze standing upright in the fields. Across Montana, hundreds of thousands of animals died. Elsa's father lost every head he owned. After that winter, he never truly stood straight again. He worked odd jobs in Gardner when he could. He skipped meals so the children would not. By the summer of 1887, his cough had turned red. By August, he was buried in a wooden box on the hill behind the cabin. Now the arithmetic belonged to Elsa. 40 pounds of flour, a rusted axe with a loose head, a cabin with gaps wide enough to slide her fingers through. 5 months until winter. 8 cords of firewood needed to survive. She could not cut 8 cords. Not with that axe. Not with 2 children to watch. Not with hands already cracked from washing clothes in river water. Thorsen knew it. Everyone in the valley knew it. The nearest town, Gardner, was a rough scatter of buildings locals half joked about calling Shantyville. 8 miles north lay Cinnabar, where the railroad ended. 5 miles south stood Fort Yellowstone near Mammoth Hot Springs, where cavalrymen kept order in the new national park. None of them wanted 3 Norwegian orphans with no money and no relatives. "Orphan train passes through Livingston every 6 weeks, Thorsen told her that day. "I'll pay for the tickets. You'll end up in Minnesota, Iowa, somewhere decent. Farm family will take you in." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Better than dying of pride on land your father couldn't hold." Elsa felt the coins press against her palm inside her pocket. $12 jingled in the pouch he showed her. Enough for train fare. Enough to leave Montana behind forever. She looked back at her siblings. Marta's small hand clutched her dress. "No," Elsa said. Thorsen's face did not change. "The cold doesn't negotiate," he answered. "It doesn't care about courage." Then he turned his horse and rode away. That night Elsa did the numbers again by lantern light. 8 cords of wood. 32 days of cutting if she worked from dawn to dark. But she also had to fix the chinking, mend the roof, haul water, cook, plant what little garden remained, and keep Anders and Marta alive. The numbers did not work. Thorsen was right about the arithmetic. But Thorsen did not know about the old man who lived near the hot springs. The year before the cattle died, Elsa had wandered too close to the steaming vents near Mammoth. There she had met an elder from the mountain Shoshone people. He called himself Crowbird. His people had lived in the Yellowstone country long before soldiers arrived and fences were drawn on maps. He had shown her something the settlers ignored. "The earth breathes," he had said, in broken English, pressing her small hand to warm stone. "When sky kills, ground lives." He spoke of ice fog, of white air that came only in the worst cold, of tiny crystals floating in silence before a deadly drop in temperature. He told her to watch the mist rising from warm water when the air turned sharp. "It warns," he had said, "if you listen." On September 14th, Elsa listened. She saw strange mist rising from the Yellowstone River at dawn. It sparkled like crushed glass, not ordinary fog. Something heavier, something wrong. She ran 11 miles to Gardner and tried to warn them. "The ice fog is coming," she told the first man she saw. He laughed. "It's September." She tried the storekeeper, the blacksmith, anyone who would listen. By sunset, the story had twisted. By morning, she was a liar. "She's scaring folks for attention," someone said. "She wants sympathy," said another. The town grew cold before winter ever arrived. When Elsa went to buy salt with one of her $3, the storekeeper would not meet her eyes. When Anders begged the blacksmith to fix the axe head, he was told to leave. She had told the truth. They had called it madness. 3 days later, Torsen found her walking home. "Heard you made a scene," he said calmly. "No one will help you now. You've made yourself a pariah." His offer of train money still stood. She refused again. Something inside her hardened that day. Not anger. Something colder. A quiet decision. If the arithmetic did not work, she would change the arithmetic. 3 miles from the cabin, in a ravine cutting toward Mammoth, she found it by accident. Warm ground beneath her boots. She knelt. Pressed her palm flat to stone. Heat. Steam slipped from a crack in the earth. Not violent like the geysers tourists spoke of. Just steady. Breathing. The memory of Crowbird's words rose in her mind. "When sky kills, ground lives." She traced the fissure along the ravine wall. Steam rose strongest in one place, fading in others. The soil was soft volcanic ash, easier to dig than the valley clay. An idea formed slowly. What if the earth could heat a shelter? What if steam could run beneath a floor of stone and warm it from below? What if winter did not have to be fought with wood alone? It sounded foolish. It sounded impossible. It sounded like something settlers would laugh at. Elsa walked back to the cabin that evening and looked at her siblings. "We're not wintering here," she said quietly. Anders frowned. "This is Father's land." "We'll come back in spring," she answered. "But if we stay here, we won't see spring." She led them to the ravine the next morning. The ground was warm beneath their boots. "This is where we'll live," Elsa said. Marta touched the soil and, for the first time in weeks, her eyes changed. It was the first spark of hope. Behind them, the valley lay quiet and beautiful. Above them, the sky was clear and blue. And far to the northwest, beyond the bend of the Yellowstone River, mist was already rising. The first trench took all morning. Elsa drove the broken shovel into the soft volcanic soil and pushed with her whole weight. The blade bent. The handle splintered. She kept digging. The steam vent hissed beside her, steady and calm, as if the earth did not notice the child carving lines into its skin. She dug the main channel first, 18 inches deep and wide enough to lay flat stones across. The steam rolled along the trench like breath in cold air. When the soil collapsed, she packed it back with her hands. When rocks blocked her path, she pried them loose with the axe. By afternoon, her palms were blistered. By sunset, the blisters had burst. Anders carried stones from the ravine floor. Marta sorted them into piles, flat ones for walls, larger ones for covers. Round ones set aside in neat rows because it gave her something to focus on besides fear. They worked until the sky turned purple. That night they slept beside the half-finished trench. The ground beneath them was warm. Elsa lay awake listening to the steam move under the soil and wondered if she had lost her mind. On the third day, a woman appeared at the edge of the ravine. Ingrid Halvorsen stood with her arms folded, watching. She was a widow in her 50s with sharp eyes and a face that had weathered more winters than Elsa could count. She grew vegetables north of Gardner and sold them to Fort Yellowstone. People said she minded her own business. People also said she noticed everything. "They say you're building your own grave," Ingrid said finally. Elsa did not look up. "They say a lot." Ingrid stepped closer and examined the trench. Steam drifted through the lined stones Elsa had fitted like puzzle pieces. "What are you doing?" Elsa explained it plainly. The vent, the channels, stones that would hold heat, a floor warmed from beneath instead of from fire. Ingrid listened without smiling. Will it work? I don't know, Elsa answered, but the cabin won't. The older woman pressed her hand to one of the heated stones. Her eyebrows lifted. It's warm. She stood silent for a long moment. I have turnips ready in 2 weeks, she said at last. If you're still digging when they're ready, I'll bring a bushel. Not charity, payment for curiosity. Then she walked away. The next days blurred together. Elsa dug parallel channels across what would become the floor space. She lined each with flat stones and sealed the gaps with mud mixed with grass. At the far end, she built a crude vent stack of stacked rocks so steam could escape without choking them. Her hands became strips of raw flesh. She wrapped them in torn fabric. When that failed, she used birch bark. Anders tried to keep up. He was strong for 9, but not strong enough. Marta rarely spoke. She sorted and stacked and watched her sister with wide eyes. By early October, frost clung to the grass every morning. The channels were finished. Steam flowed steadily beneath the open trenches, warming the stone walls from within. Now she needed to cover them. The cover stones had to be wide enough to span the trenches, and thick enough not to crack under heat. Elsa searched every hillside. She dragged heavy slabs on makeshift sledges of pine branches. Some weighed more than she did. She learned to lever them with sticks and roll them slowly into place. Her body began to fail. Her dress hung loose. Her cheeks hollowed. She ate half portions and hid the rest for Marta. She worked from dawn until dark and collapsed at night. On October 18th, she did not rise. Anders found her face down in the dirt beside the trench. He ran to Gardner. He begged for help. The storekeeper turned away. The blacksmith shook his head. Martha Crenshaw, loudest woman in town, said, "Your sister brought this on herself." Anders returned alone. When Elsa opened her eyes, the sky above her was pale and distant. "No one would come," Anders whispered. "I know," she answered. She forced herself to stand. "We are not done." 2 days later, Ingrid returned with a bushel of turnips and a sack of flour. "You're dying," Ingrid said bluntly. "I'm busy," Elsa replied. Ingrid studied the half-covered floor and the bleeding hands and made a decision. "I'll help," she said, "not because I pity you, because I want to see if you're right." From that day forward, the shelter changed. Ingrid knew how to notch logs so walls would hold. She knew how to mix mud and grass into strong chinking. She knew how to build walls that shed wind instead of welcoming it. She brought salt pork, beans, nails, news. "They're betting on when you'll freeze," Ingrid told her one evening. Elsa did not look up from fitting a stone. Let them. By November 1st, the stone floor was complete. 100 square feet of warm surface, heat rising steady from below. The walls stood waist high. The roof did not exist. On November 5th, the temperature fell to 0. On November 8th, it dropped to 15 below. On November 10th, Elsa saw it again. Mist rose from the Yellowstone River at dawn. Not soft gray fog. Bright, crystalline vapor that shimmered in the cold light. Ice fog. She felt it in her bones. "Ingrid," she said quietly, "we need the roof now." They built it in 2 days. Pine poles stretched across the walls, branches woven tight. Thick sod cut from the hillside laid 6 inches deep across the top. Mud sealed the gaps. It was not beautiful. It was not permanent. It was desperate. On the evening of November 11th, the temperature fell to 22 below 0. Inside, the floor was warm. Elsa pressed her palm against the stone and felt heat steady as a heartbeat. "It works," Anders whispered. "It works so far," Ingrid corrected. The next morning, the wind came. It did not blow, it attacked. The shelter shook. Snow flew sideways. The sky turned white. The ice fog thickened until the world beyond the door vanished. Elsa sealed the gaps with cloth and grass. The walls frosted white on the inside. The air grew sharp and painful to breathe. But the floor held. Heat rose through the stones, steady and stubborn. The thermometer Ingrid had hung outside dropped past its lowest mark. 40 below. Then lower. They had no more flour, no more beans, only salt and snow for water. The second night was worse. The wind screamed like something alive. Frost crawled across the ceiling. Elsa stayed awake, listening for cracks in the roof. Then, on the third day, someone pounded on the door. Elsa froze. No one could survive outside. The pounding came again. She pulled back the elk hide and stared into a face covered in ice. Gustav Thorsen stood there, beard frozen solid, eyes wide. Behind him, shapes moved in the swirling white. "You were right," he croaked. And behind him, the town that had called her a liar was dying. Gustav Thorsen stumbled inside first. The warmth from the stone floor rose around him like something alive. Steam curled upward through the narrow seams between rocks. Frost melted from his coat and fell in wet clumps at his boots. Behind him came Henrik Lund, the miner who had laughed at her warning. Then Mrs. Bergstrom from the general store. 2 cavalry soldiers from Fort Yellowstone. A woman clutching a small boy whose head hung limp against her shoulder. 8 of them in all. 8 frozen bodies crowding into a shelter built for 3 children. The air temperature dropped the moment they entered. Their frozen clothes sucked heat from the room like dry sponges dropped into water. The walls crackled as frost thickened along the logs. Elsa closed the door and sealed it fast. "Sit," she ordered. "On the floor. Press your hands flat." They hesitated only a second. Gustav lowered himself first, heavy and shaking. He laid his palms on the warm stone. His breath came in sharp gasps. "It's warm," he said, disbelief breaking through his voice. The others followed. Henrik fell to his knees. Mrs. Bergstrom wept openly. The soldiers pressed their gloved hands down and then tore the gloves off to feel the heat directly against their skin. The woman with the boy did not sit. "He won't wake," she whispered. Elsa stepped toward her. The boy's lips were blue. His eyelashes were stiff with frost. His small body felt like packed snow. "Lay him on the stones," Elsa said. The woman stared at her. "Now." She knelt and placed the child flat against the warmest part of the floor near the main steam channel. Elsa pulled off his coat, his mittens, his boots. His skin was pale and cold as marble. "Cover him with blankets," Elsa said, "but leave his chest against the stone." She did not know if this was correct. She only remembered Crowbird telling her never to force heat too fast into frozen hands. Warm, slow, let the body take it gently. The woman did as she was told. The shelter grew silent except for wind screaming outside and the ragged breathing of a dying child. Anders moved close to Elsa. "There's no food," he whispered. Elsa nodded once. "We'll think about that later." Time stretched long and thin. One of the soldiers began to sob quietly as blood returned to his fingers. Henrik stared at the stone beneath his hands as if it were a miracle. Mrs. Bergstrom rocked back and forth, muttering prayers. Gustav said nothing. He simply pressed both palms to the floor and closed his eyes. At midnight, the boy coughed. It was small, weak, but it was there. His mother gasped so sharply it echoed off the walls. The boy's eyelids fluttered. He turned his head against the warm stone and began to cry. The sound filled the shelter. "Alive. He's warm," the woman whispered again and again. "He's warm." The people who had called Elsa a liar now looked at her as if she held something sacred. "How?" Henrik asked. Elsa pointed to the floor. "The earth," she said. "Steam from below. Stones hold the heat." Gustav's eyes opened slowly. "You built this?" "Yes." "You learned it from Indians." She did not look away. "I learned it from someone who knew this land longer than we have." He said nothing more. Outside, the storm did not weaken. The wind raged through the ravine like a beast hunting prey. Snow piled against the walls. Ice fog pressed thick and white against every crack. The thermometer outside had fallen beyond its markings. 40 below, then lower still. Inside, the floor stayed warm. By morning, they had no food left. 11 people now shared that small heated room. 11 mouths. 11 bodies drawing heat from the same stone. Elsa's stomach twisted with hunger, but she did not let it show. The second day inside the storm, the wind reached its worst. The roof groaned under drifting snow. Frost crept down the inside walls in feathery white veins. Breath turned to glittering crystals in the air. Mrs. Bergstrom stared at Elsa. "We would have died," she said simply. Elsa did not answer. Gustav finally spoke. "The Crenshaw boarding house collapsed," he said. "Snow load, 3 inside, only 2 came out." Martha Crenshaw, the woman who had called her a liar. Elsa felt no satisfaction, only a quiet weight. "The stables burned," Henrik added. "Someone tried to light fires to warm the horses. Wind took it." More silence. The arithmetic had changed. On the third morning the wind stopped. It did not fade. It stopped. The sudden quiet felt unreal. Elsa pushed aside the elk hide and stepped into blinding white. Snow lay 3 feet deep in the ravine. Drifts higher than a wagon wheel pressed against the hillside. The sky above was sharp and hard blue. The thermometer hung on a pine tree nearby, 43 below zero. 3 days earlier it had been above 20, a drop of 65 degrees in less than a week. Behind her, footsteps crunched. Gustav joined her, coat wrapped tight. "You were right," he said again. Elsa nodded once. "We need to check the town," he added. They walked back toward Gardner together through knee-deep snow and air so cold it burned the lungs. What they found felt like a battlefield. 17 people dead. Some frozen trying to reach neighbors. 2 soldiers lost between Fort Yellowstone and Mammoth, only a few hundred yards apart. Livestock scattered stiff across fields like broken statues. Smoke rose from collapsed roofs. Doors hung open where families had fled. The cold had not spared pride. It had not spared experience. It had not spared arithmetic. Word spread quickly. The Norwegian orphan had predicted the ice fog. The Norwegian orphan had built a heated shelter from steam and stone. The Norwegian orphan had saved lives. Within weeks, people came to see it. They walked carefully into the ravine and pressed their hands against the warm floor. Ingrid stood beside Elsa one afternoon as Henrik measured the channels. "They're copying you," Ingrid said. "They should," Elsa answered. Families began building their own versions near hot springs. Stronger walls, better roofs, proper doors. The idea moved faster than pride. Only Gustav never built one. He had coal. He had men to cut wood. He had pride. But when Elsa's name came up in conversation, he did not argue anymore. He did not speak against her. He simply listened. Winter slowly loosened its grip. By spring, the valley thawed. Elsa returned to her father's claim with Anders and Marta. The sod cabins still stood. The fields were bare but not lost. They had survived. They planted again. They repaired what could be repaired. And when people in town spoke of that November, they did not call her a liar anymore. They called her something else. But Elsa did not care what they called her. She cared only that her siblings were alive, and that when the earth had breathed warmth beneath her feet, she had listened. Spring did not come gently. It came slow and muddy and uncertain, like the land itself was not sure it wanted to forgive what winter had done. Snow melted in uneven patches across the Yellowstone Valley. Dead cattle emerged from drifts like broken monuments. Fences leaned. Roofs sagged. The town of Gardner moved carefully, quietly, as if afraid to anger the sky again. Elsa returned to her father's claim with Anders and Marta the first week of April. The sod cabin still stood, though frost had split parts of the outer wall. The roof sagged but had not collapsed. Inside, the air smelled stale and forgotten. She stepped through the doorway and felt the weight of memory settle on her shoulders. Her father's chair still sat by the cold stove. The blanket he had used during his last weeks remained folded on the cot. Dust had gathered in the corners. The winter wind had pushed fine snow through the chinking and left pale streaks along the floorboards. "This is home," Anders said quietly. Elsa nodded. They would not live in the steam shelter again. It had served its purpose. It had been survival, not belonging. Now came a different kind of arithmetic. The Homestead Act gave them 5 years to prove up the land, to plant, to build, to live on it continuously. Her father had filed in 1886. They had until 1892, 5 years. Elsa was 12. She picked up the rusted axe and walked outside. They planted late that spring, but they planted. Potatoes first. Then turnips. Beans. Anything that could grow quickly and endure Montana soil. Henrik Lund came one afternoon with lumber scraps from Cook City. "For the roof," he said simply. He did not mention that he had once laughed at her. Mrs. Bergstrom sent sacks of flour at half price. Ingrid Halverson brought seed potatoes and stood with hands on her hips as Elsa rebuilt the chinking with better mud and grass mixture. "You're doing it wrong," Ingrid muttered. Then she stepped forward and showed her how to pack it tighter. The valley had shifted. Not because Elsa had demanded it, because winter had. People spoke her name differently now, not with pity, not with annoyance, with something close to respect. By summer, letters began arriving from Livingston and Bozeman. Word had spread beyond Park County. Ranchers asked how to build steam floors. Carpenters asked for diagrams. Soldiers from Fort Yellowstone came quietly to see the ravine for themselves. Elsa showed them the channels. She spoke plainly. No boasting, no anger. Line the trench with stone. Leave an outlet. Let the steam move. Let the rock hold heat. Some listened, some nodded and left. Some returned the next year with shelters of their own. Ingrid was the first to build one properly. 2 miles north of town, near a small hot spring, she constructed a solid structure with thicker walls and a real door. She hired a carpenter to make sure the roof could hold heavy snow. When the next winter dropped to 40 below, her shelter held 55 degrees inside. "That's not luck," Ingrid said proudly. "That's sense." Henrik built one near Cook City. A rancher named Patterson built another at Chico Hot Springs. By the winter of 1889, nearly a dozen steam-heated shelters stood scattered across the Yellowstone region. People stopped laughing at the ground. They began listening to it. Gustav Thorsen never built one. He continued banking his barns, cutting firewood, and burning coal. He had lost cattle that November, but not enough to ruin him. Pride remained thick in him. Yet he never again told a child they would freeze. When Elsa passed him on the road one autumn afternoon, he removed his hat. Nothing more. For him, it was enough. Years passed quietly. Anders grew tall and strong. By 14, he apprenticed with a carpenter in Livingston. He sent small wages home when he could. Marta found her voice fully again. She laughed easily by the time she turned 10, though sometimes in deep winter her eyes drifted toward the hills where steam rose faint and white. Elsa kept working. She learned to read land the way Crowbird had. She watched mist. She studied wind direction. She listened to silence. In 1892, 5 years after her father's death, she stood before the county office in Livingston and signed the final papers. The Morenius claim was theirs. She was 17. The clerk glanced at her. "You proved up," he said. "Yes," Elsa answered. She returned to the land that evening and walked to the hill where her father was buried. The grass had grown thick around the simple wooden marker. She stood there alone and let the wind move through her hair. "We did it," she said softly. "Not pride, not triumph, just fact." That same year, she sold the old sod cabin to a family newly arrived from Minnesota. With the money she built a proper frame house. Double walls. Glass windows. A coal stove that burned clean and steady. She did not build it over steam. That chapter was finished. She married a surveyor named Thomas Linkfist in 1896. He was quiet and steady and did not laugh at strange ideas. They had 4 children. 3 survived to adulthood. Life did not become easy. Montana never allowed that. There were dry summers, harsh winters, illness, loss. But never again did she fear the arithmetic. She kept Crowbird's eagle feather in a small wooden box beside her bed. Until the day she died, she never saw him again. She did not know if he had survived or been taken to a reservation. She only knew that his lessons had lived. On November 12th each year, she stepped outside at dawn. She watched the river. If mist rose bright and strange in the early light, she remembered. The temperature had dropped 65 degrees in 3 days in 1887. 17 people had died. The valley had nearly broken. But the ground had breathed, and she had listened. She lived in Park County until 1941. When she passed at the age of 66, neighbors spoke at her funeral. They spoke of courage. They spoke of winter. They spoke of a floor of warm stone in a ravine when the world turned white. But if Elsa could have answered them, she would have said something simpler. She had not defeated winter. She had not conquered the land. She had only paid attention. And sometimes, in Montana, that was the difference between freezing and living. The story of that winter did not fade. It grew. By the time Elsa's youngest child was old enough to ask about the feather in the wooden box beside her bed, the tale had already traveled beyond Park County. Ranchers in Idaho spoke of the steam floors. Railroad men in Livingston passed the story down the line. Even soldiers at Fort Yellowstone told new recruits about the girl who had listened when the earth warned her. But Elsa did not speak about it often. For her, it had not been legend. It had been hunger, fear, cold so sharp it felt alive. Still, every year when November came, something inside her tightened. She would step outside before dawn and walk toward the edge of her land. The Yellowstone River shimmered in the distance, sometimes calm, sometimes restless. She would stand there and watch the air. If mist rose soft and gray, she would nod and return inside. If it rose bright and crystalline, sparkling like crushed glass, she would feel the memory move through her bones. Ice fog. She had never been wrong about it again. Years passed. Gardner changed. Stronger buildings replaced the weak ones. Barns were reinforced. Roofs were pitched steeper. And near hot springs across the region, steam shelters stood quiet and ready. People no longer laughed at the idea of warming from below. They called it practical. They called it smart. Few remembered who had first cut the trenches with bleeding hands. Gustav Thorsen grew old as well. His ranch shrank over time. Hard winters and shifting markets did what pride could not stop. One autumn afternoon, when Elsa was nearly 40, he rode out to her land alone. He dismounted this time. No fox fur coat. No saddle speech. Just a tired man standing in the yard of a woman he had once dismissed. "You built something that saved people," he said. Elsa did not smile. "The earth built it," she answered. He nodded slowly. "I was wrong." For Gustav Thorsen, those 3 words carried the weight of mountains. Elsa inclined her head once. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. The ravine where the first steam shelter had stood slowly reclaimed itself. The roof collapsed long before 1900. Sod and branch returned to soil. Only a few flat stones remained, half buried, warm even in early frost. Sometimes travelers would ask her to show them the place. She would walk them there quietly and let them kneel and press their hands to the ground. "Listen," she would say. That was always her answer. Not instructions, not diagrams. Listen. When she passed in 1941, at 66 years old, snow had already dusted the Yellowstone Valley. Her children gathered around her bed. The eagle feather lay beside her hand. Her last winter had been mild. Her last breath came without struggle. After the funeral, Anders walked to the ravine alone. He was an old man by then, his carpenter's hands thick and scarred. He knelt where the shelter had once stood and pressed his palm flat against the earth. Warm. Even now, he closed his eyes and remembered a 12-year-old girl standing barefoot in the dust while a rancher told her she would freeze. He remembered the arithmetic. 8 cords of wood she could not cut. 5 months she did not have. $3 silver in her pocket. And the mist rising from the river. On November 12, 1887, the temperature dropped 65 degrees in 3 days. At its worst, It fell to 43 below zero. Ice fog filled the valley and killed 17 people. It killed cattle by the hundreds. It cracked wood and split stone. It did not kill Elsa Morenius. It did not kill Anders. It did not kill Marta. The floor she built from stone and steam held steady warmth while the world outside turned to white death. And when those who had mocked her came pounding at her door, she opened it. She did not freeze. She did not turn them away. She let them in. The arithmetic had been wrong. The earth had breathed beneath her feet. And she had listened. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes courage can come from the smallest hands. And follow for more Wild West stories where the land tests the brave and the brave answer back.